The air in New Orleans that May was a thick, suffocating blanket of jasmine and decay, but it was nothing compared to the glacial chill in my father's voice. He stood on the commencement stage at Tulane University, bathed in the buttery southern sunlight, and with a placid smile, he announced to the world that I was no longer his daughter. No warning, no quiet phone call, just a public execution of my identity, delivered between a boilerplate speech about legacy and a proud toast to my sister. They thought they had erased me. They had scrubbed my name from the embossed invitations, pruned me from the family seating chart, and snipped me from the lineage like a dead branch. But their gravest miscalculation wasn't in disowning me. It was in believing I didn't already know their secrets. The stolen birthright, the meticulously forged signatures, the historic home sold from under me while they preached about family values. In the end, they weren't the ones who exposed me. I was the one who held the match, and I was about to set their perfectly curated world on fire. I had arrived at the Audubon tea room for the reception early, not from excitement, but from a cold, clinical need for confirmation. The Louisiana sun hammered down on the manicured gardens, making the Spanish moss drip with a humid golden light that seemed to congratulate everyone but me. Graduates in their dark robes and colored sashes buzzed like cicadas, their laughter echoing under the ancient oaks. Parents clutched bouquets of magnolias and gift bags from upscale boutiques on Magazine Street. I held nothing, not even my breath. When I spotted them near the reserved tables, my steps slowed to a crawl. My mother, Genevieve Vance, was a vision in a Chanel tweed suit the color of a pale storm cloud, her smile as hard and beautiful as a diamond. My father, Sterling, stood beside her, his seersucker jacket folded neatly over his arm, one hand checking his antique Patek Philippe, the other impatiently tapping against his thigh. And between them my sister Serafina glowed. She was a portrait of Southern perfection in her academic regalia, her honors cords layered like precious jewels. The golden child. They didn't see me at first. When they finally did, Genevieve's eyes, the color of faded chicory, flickered over me as if I were a vaguely familiar face from the garden club. "Oh, Ilara," she said, her voice smooth as bourbon, but with no warmth. "You made it." "I received the invitation," I replied, my own voice a stranger in my ears, devoid of the tremor I'd expected. She let out a dry, airy laugh. "A forwarded copy, I assume. The official list was rather exclusive." My father said nothing. He simply cleared his throat and looked toward the stage, as if willing the ceremony to begin. Serafina, however, opened her arms for a hug. It was a brief, hesitant gesture, and I leaned in out of a ghost of a habit. "You look breathtaking," I whispered, and I meant it. "Thanks," she murmured back, her voice a soft, apologetic thread of sound. "I'm glad you came." But her eyes, wide and nervous, darted toward our mother, forever measuring the acceptable quota of affection she was permitted to show me. My gaze fell upon a gilded easel standing near the entrance. In elegant calligraphy it read, "The Vance Family." Beneath it were the names, Sterling, Genevieve, Serafina, +2 designated guests. I searched for my own name, a fool's errand. It wasn't there. A hostess with a clipboard handed me a name tag. It was plain white cardstock. No family crest, no delicate ribbon, just the word guest printed in sterile block letters. I stared at that badge for a long time. 20 years ago, I had helped my grandfather design the family crest, spending a week with him in his dusty study, poring over heraldry books. I should have turned around right then. That would have been the sane, self-preserving choice. But instead, I clipped the anonymous badge to my blazer and walked into the reception hall like a specter attending her own wake. The ceremony had been a blur. Speeches from deans and trustees, polite applause, the clinking of ice in water glasses. I sat alone in a far-flung section next to a sleeping grandfather and a toddler methodically shredding a program. Then, Sterling had stepped to the microphone. He adjusted his tie, smiled that practiced politician's smile, and began. Today, we celebrate the singular brilliance and unwavering dedication of our eldest daughter, Serafina, he'd declared, his voice resonating with false sincerity. The crowd applauded politely. Serafina demurely lowered her gaze. But this day also marks a pivotal moment for our family, he continued, and my stomach plummeted into a cold, dark void. A necessary recalibration of our values, our focus, and our legacy. We have made the difficult but essential decision to no longer extend our name or our resources to those who do not align with the integrity and vision we uphold. That, regrettably, includes our youngest daughter, Ilara. Silence, not a single gasp, just a wave of uncomfortable coughs and the rustle of silk and linen. I didn't stand. I didn't weep. I sat there, my hands gripping my knees, suddenly aware of every single nerve ending in my body, all of them screaming at once. My ears filled with a low, staticky hum. I stared at the edge of the stage, at a loose thread on the velvet curtain. Serafina had not uttered a word. Someone in the row behind me whispered, "Did he just—" Another voice murmured back, "At a graduation." How utterly tacky. I swallowed hard, turning my face away from the stage, forcing my jaw to remain locked. The speech droned on, a meaningless word salad of investments, future, roots, and weeds. I couldn't follow it. After what felt like an eternity, I stood and walked out of the tent. My movements were not rushed or shaken. They were methodical, as if I were a machine executing a pre-written code. Now, at the reception, I tried to find my place. A large round table was marked with a sign that read, "Vance Guests." I approached it, scanning the delicate handwritten place cards. Nothing. Serafina's name was there, nestled beside our Aunt Beatrice. Even her college roommate had a spot, but not me. A girl I hadn't seen since our debutante days looked up from a neighboring table and blinked in surprise. "Oh, hey, Ilara, I thought you weren't coming. Your mom told everyone it was a very private family celebration." Something about keeping the focus pure. She offered an awkward smile, as if realizing too late how cruel that sounded. On the table, beside each setting, was a folded ivory card. I picked one up. The gold foil lettering gleamed. I opened it. "Congratulations to our only daughter, Serafina. With all our love, Mom and Dad." That was it. That was the moment something inside me didn't snap or break, but shifted. It was a tectonic tilt, silent and catastrophic. A woman in a floral dress drifted past me, glanced at my badge, and said with a saccharine smile, "You must be with the catering staff. You're not wearing the family pin." I looked down at my badge. Guest, not a name, not a title. In my head, I heard a voice, cold and clear, say, "Not even a name tag, just a ghost badge. That's all you are to them now." So I smiled. I said nothing. I plucked a glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and began walking toward the back exit. I didn't storm out. Ghosts don't make a scene. They just vanish, taking things with them that no one will notice are gone until it's far too late. As I slipped out into the thick, cloying air, I slid that ivory card, the one meant for Serafina, into my purse without breaking stride. And once I was home, I placed it in a lacquered box under my bed, beside a growing collection of evidence they never intended for me to see. That night, I didn't cry. I got quiet. And then, I started to dig. The rain began just after midnight, a soft, insistent tapping on the wrought iron balcony of my French Quarter apartment. It was a sound too polite for the storm that was brewing inside me. I sat wrapped in a quilt, my laptop casting a ghostly blue light across the room. I had decided to stop hoping, and so I stopped crying. Instead, I began to work. there was still a forgotten shared server linked to my personal email, a relic from a time when I did pro bono accounting for the Vance Family Foundation. They had never bothered to revoke my access. I was the one who had set it up, after all. It was so typical of them. They erased people with words and omissions, not with something as mundane as technology. I clicked through folders at first, a numb procession of old tax files, donor receipts, and board meeting minutes. Then my brain snagged on a file name. A folder labeled Estate Holdings Updated. Inside was a single PDF, Transfer Authorization, Bayou Property, Final. I clicked. And there it was, my full legal name, Ilara Genevieve Vance, typed neatly above a signature. It looked almost like mine, but the E was too rounded, the loop on the L too broad. It was a clumsy forgery, and it had been notarized. My eyes flew to the notary's stamp in the margin. Serafina Vance, my own sister. I fumbled through a drawer and pulled out an old apartment lease bearing my real signature. I held them side by side, not even close. It hit me then with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a crime. They hadn't just cut me out of a speech. They had forged my signature to strip me of the only thing my grandfather had ever left directly to me in his will, a stake in the old fishing cabin on the bayou. The place I'd spent summers learning to cast a line and repaint the weathered shutters. The place they'd let Serafina use for a lavish, bohemian chic photo shoot for a magazine feature last spring. I closed the laptop slowly, as if sealing a tomb. Sleep was impossible. Around 3 a.m., I picked up the phone and called the only person in my family who had ever looked at me like I was whole, Aunt Beatrice. After a long pause, her familiar raspy voice came through the line. "Ilara, honey, are you all right?" "Not really," my voice cracked. "I found a property transfer. My name is on it, but it's not my signature." Another silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. "Oh, Ilara," she finally whispered. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't know what to do," she confessed, her voice thin with old guilt. "Your mother told me it was just some paperwork, cleaning up the estate for tax purposes." I slid down the cold plaster wall to the floor. "You knew they were moving my name off the deed." "I thought perhaps it was a mistake, or something they'd discuss with you." "I'm so sorry, child. I should have spoken up. But you know how Genevieve gets. And your father, he just follows her lead." That sentence hung in the air like cigar smoke. You know how Genevieve gets. As if she were a hurricane, a natural disaster one could only endure, not question. "I'm tired of making excuses for them, Aunt Beatrice." "I know, baby." Her voice cracked. "I know." By dawn, the edges of my grief had hardened into something sharp and cold. This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about the way they found a way to uninvite me from my own life every time something real was at stake. From the debutante ball program, from family holidays, from the house I had helped build memories in. But now, they were going to remember exactly who I was. Not because I would beg for a seat at their table ever again, but because I was about to be the one to flip it over. By mid-morning, I had found it, a different property. A historic Garden District mansion, the one with the sprawling verandas and gas lamps that flickered at dusk. The one our grandmother Elise had left to the Vance Family Trust for all her grandchildren. Status, sold, buyer, Harlow Arts, LLC. I clicked the name. The registered agent for Harlow Arts was a corporate attorney in Baton Rouge, the same one Serafina had gushed about on social media 6 weeks ago. They hadn't just transferred it, they had liquidated it, a piece of our shared history, sold to fund Serafina's new exclusive art gallery. The slogan on her gallery's website read, "Legacy-minded curation, inspired by family heritage." The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost elegant. My grandmother would have been spinning in her grave. This was a violation. The words settled in my gut, cold and heavy as lead. This was no longer grief. It was something sharper. It was resolve. I needed air. I threw on a coat and walked the few blocks to a small bookstore on Chartres Street, hoping the rhythm of my footsteps would quiet the storm in my head. But fate, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. As I rounded the corner by the local history section, I heard a familiar, syrupy voice. "Elara, darling." I turned. Mrs. Dubois, an old friend of my mother's known for her vicious gossip and her prize-winning azaleas, was clutching a book on Creole architecture. She smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "I heard Serafina's new gallery is simply divine. Your mother says she's already making a name for herself in the luxury art market. Isn't that just wonderful?" I forced a polite nod. "Yes. Funny, though. I thought that mansion was still in the family." The shift in her expression was microscopic, a flicker of panicked recognition. The kind people get when they realize they've overplayed their hand. "Oh, well, I'm sure I don't know the details. You know how parents are, always making these grand moves." "Moves without telling their children?" I asked, my gaze steady. She didn't answer. She just smiled that smile, the one that said, "Don't you dare make a scene, sweetheart." I left the store without another word. By the time I reached my apartment, a text buzzed from a college friend who had no idea of the war that had been declared. "Heard your folks sold the Garden District house. Serafina is absolutely killing it. So jealous of her life, RN, jealous." The word tasted like vinegar. People envied my sister because they saw the shine, not the shadows she cast. They didn't know the cost of her success was the silent, systematic erasure of mine. This wasn't just business. It was abandonment executed in 1,000 quiet, well-dressed cuts. It was a legacy where my name left no echo, so I did the only thing that made sense. I changed my clothes, printed every document, every forged signature, every damning email, and packed them in a briefcase. Some answers aren't found online. Some are waiting behind frosted glass doors and the strained smiles of receptionists. And I knew exactly where I needed to go. I stood across the street from the Vance Foundation headquarters, a grand, white-columned building that looked more like a consulate than a charity. The last time I was here, I was 16, clutching a scholarship essay. My mother had told me to come in through the side door so as not to distract the board members. She told me if I smiled and stood still, I might be considered. They picked Serafina's best friend instead. Today, I wasn't smiling. I walked in through the front doors. My heels clicked on the marble floor like hammer blows. Genevieve didn't flinch when I entered her office without knocking. She looked up from her computer, her expression one of placid annoyance. "Elara," she said smoothly, "I'd offer you a seat, but I assume this won't take long." I remained standing. Her office was a shrine to herself, white orchids, award plaques, a framed headline from a society magazine, Genevieve Vance, matriarch, philanthropist, visionary. "I regret that you felt the need to make a scene," she began, folding her hands on the mahogany desk. "But we did what was best for the family's image." "You don't regret the decision," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "You regret that it looked bad." She exhaled softly. "It's about cohesion, simplicity. We can't have every branch of the family tree growing in a different direction. It looks messy." "You mean it looks like you can't control it," I countered. Her lips thinned into a razor line. "I hope they notice," I said softly. "Because I am done being pruned to fit your perfect garden." That evening, I went to the Foundation's annual masquerade gala. I had RSVP'd months ago, back when I still believed I had a place in their world. I wore a simple black gown, a stark contrast to the glittering masks and jewel-toned silks around me. I kept to the edges of the ballroom, an observer. Midway through dinner, my father raised his glass for a toast. "To our only heir, Serafina," he declared, his voice booming, "whose brilliance continues to guide this family's legacy forward." A few heads turned my way, their masked faces showing flickers of pity and morbid curiosity before they quickly looked away. My hand tightened around the stem of my champagne flute until I thought it might shatter. Even Serafina faltered, a brief, unsettled blink, but she didn't correct him. She simply smiled and clinked her glass with the nearest donor. Silence served her just as well as lies. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exile, polished and gift-wrapped. I left before dessert. No one noticed. As I sat in the back of a cab, the city lights blurring past, I replayed every calculated slight, every polite dismissal. They had crafted their legacy without me. Now it was my turn to craft theirs. The next morning, I slid the printed files into a velvet envelope, one my mother had given me years ago, with a note that read, "Always write with grace." I drove to the office of Warren Bell, my grandfather's old attorney, a man my parents had long since replaced. He greeted me with a wary expression. "I need you to review this," I said, handing him the envelope. "There's a notarized affidavit, a challenge to the trust, and a digital link to journal entries with verbatim conversations." "I assume this comes with demands," he said, his eyes grave. "No," I replied. "It comes with consequences." The public fallout was swift and brutal. An anonymous source, me, had leaked the documents to a Historical Preservation Society's online journal. The story, titled "Legacy for Sale: Questions of Integrity at the Vance Foundation," spread like wildfire through the insular world of New Orleans' old money. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It referenced internal memos, trust disbursements that bypassed a key beneficiary, and the sale of historic properties under questionable circumstances. Donors began to pull their funding. The gala for the following year was postponed indefinitely. Then someone leaked the audio. Not from me. Someone from inside the foundation. A person with a conscience, perhaps. It was a recording of Genevieve at a board meeting. "We only use Serafina's face in marketing. The other one, she doesn't fit the narrative we're selling." Then Sterling's voice, low and conspiratorial. "We need to be careful what Alara finds. She used to read everything. The internet dissected every syllable." The family scrambled to do damage control, announcing a family unity luncheon. Only 2 board members showed up. Serafina was a no-show. It was too late to patch the sinking ship. The courtroom was a small, stuffy chamber in the probate court, smelling of dust and desperation. I had filed the petition quietly. Philip, my new lawyer, stood. "Your Honor, we present Exhibit D." He placed a certified copy of my grandmother Elise's original will on the judge's bench. This version predates the one my clients have been using. It clearly names Alara Vance as the primary beneficiary of the Bar Harbor estate and an equal heir to the Vance Trust. Callista's hand froze mid-scroll on her phone. My mother's head snapped toward me, her face a mask of fury. "That version was never meant to be official," my father blurted out. The judge looked over her glasses. "Intentions are not law, Mr. Vance. Documents are." Philip played the recording. My mother's voice, cool and dismissive, echoed through the silent room. "The other one doesn't fit the narrative." Astria shot to her feet, her voice a venomous hiss. "You ungrateful child! You waited all this time just to destroy us!" I stood too, my own voice calm and clear. I waited so I wouldn't destroy myself in the process. The judge's ruling was swift. The disputed properties reverted to me. The Vance Trust was frozen pending a full audit. and the foundation's tax filings were referred to the state attorney general for criminal review. My mother stood frozen, the architect of a world built on perception, watching it all crumble on public record. 6 months later, I stood barefoot in a sunlit room in a renovated historic library just outside the city. I had used my inheritance to transform it into a literacy and arts center for youth who had aged out of the foster care system. The plaque in the entryway read, "In memory of Elise Vance." For the children who are told they don't fit the picture, and for those who dare to draw their own, my parents never contacted me. Callista did. An envelope arrived one Tuesday. Inside, a single page with 10 words in her sharp, slanted script. "You were right. I'm sorry it took this to see it." I didn't write back. I placed the letter in a box with the guest badge from her graduation. Neither held any power over me anymore. A little boy with a gap-toothed grin interrupted my thoughts. He held out a small, lopsided ribbon he'd made from construction paper and glitter. "This is for you," he said shyly. "It's a badge for being important." I knelt to his level, my eyes stinging. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick. "I think this is the best one I've ever received." I pinned it to my dress right over my heart. I sat down in the back row as one of the teens began a poetry reading, not to be seen, not to prove a point, but simply to be present. I had learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving those who wounded you. It's about releasing yourself from the exhausting hope that they will ever change. Some family legacies are chains. True freedom is knowing when to break them and having the courage to forge your own. The silence around me no longer ached with loneliness. It was filled with peace. It was space I had made for myself. And it was everything